Frank Sinatra's voice was shaking. Under the stage lights, in front of 800 people, he could see the men who wanted him dead. And that night, the person who saved his life was someone he never expected. Bumpy Johnson. The Cotton Club, Manhattan. March 15th, 1955. The most exclusive venue in New York was packed wall to wall. Politicians, movie stars, millionaires, and killers all sitting at the same tables, sipping the same champagne. But in the VIP section, tension hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Because Frank Sinatra owed the wrong people money, and tonight they'd come to collect. Sinatra stood at the edge of the stage, adjusting his bow tie with trembling fingers. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool March air. His career was in ruins. The golden voice that had made millions scream was barely selling records anymore. Rock and roll was killing crooners, and Frank's debts were killing Frank. 6 months earlier, he'd borrowed $200,000 from the Genovese family to finance his comeback album. The deal was simple. Pay back $300,000 in 6 months or disappear. The album flopped, the money was gone, and tomorrow was the deadline. Vito Genovese had sent his best men to the Cotton Club that night, not to collect the debt, but to close the books permanently. 3 shooters positioned throughout the crowd. Giuseppe, the clutch hand Morello near the bar, Anthony Tony Bender Strollo at table 12, and Vincent the Chin Gigante by the emergency exit. Frank wasn't walking out alive. What none of them knew was that Bumpy Johnson was also in the building. Table 7, corner booth, back to the wall. He wasn't there for the music. He was there because 2 days earlier, a young black musician named Jimmy Scott had knocked on his door at 3 in the morning. Jimmy Scott was Sinatra's backup singer, one of the few artists willing to work with Frank during his career nosedive. More importantly, Jimmy was from Harlem, born on 118th Street, raised on Lenox Avenue, and under Bumpy's protection since he was 16 years old. "Mr. Johnson," Jimmy had whispered, standing in Bumpy's doorway with his hat in his hands. "They're going to kill Mr. Frank tomorrow night, at the Cotton Club. I heard them talking." Bumpy had looked at the young man for a long moment. "Why do you care what happens to Sinatra?" "Because he's the only white man in this business who treats us like equals," Jimmy replied. "When every other club in America had whites-only signs, Mr. Frank made them take them down or he wouldn't perform. He's fought for us, Mr. Johnson. Now someone needs to fight for him." Bumpy had nodded slowly. Frank Sinatra had indeed earned respect in Harlem, not just from his music, but from his actions. In 1947, when the Copacabana tried to ban black patrons, Sinatra had walked out mid-performance. When jazz clubs in downtown Manhattan refused to hire black musicians, Sinatra had publicly boycotted them. He'd used his fame as a weapon against racism, and that meant something to Bumpy Johnson. Now, on the night of March 15th, Bumpy watched from his corner table as Frank took the stage. The spotlight hit Sinatra's face, and for a moment the fear disappeared. This was what he was born to do. His voice filled the room, smooth and powerful, wrapping around the hearts of everyone present. But Bumpy's eyes weren't on the performer. They were on the predators. Giuseppe Morello had his hand inside his jacket. Tony Bender was checking his watch. Vincent Gigante was slowly moving toward the stage. The kill was planned for the 3rd song, when the lights would dim for a ballad. The 2nd song ended. Applause echoed through the club. Sinatra smiled and stepped closer to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this next number is dedicated to someone very special." That's when Giuseppe Morello began to move, hand on his gun, threading through the crowd toward the stage. 30 feet away. 25. 20. Bumpy Johnson stood up. Not quickly, not obviously, just a man stretching his legs during a performance. But his movement caught Morello's attention. The hitman's eyes locked on Bumpy's face, and recognition hit him like ice water. Bumpy Johnson, the King of Harlem, the man who'd killed Dutch Schultz's entire crew in a single night, the man who'd made Lucky Luciano himself back down from a fight. Giuseppe Morello had killed 17 men in his career, but he'd never killed anyone under Bumpy Johnson's protection. The question was Sinatra under that protection? Bumpy answered by walking directly toward Morello, his hands visible, his expression calm. He stopped 3 feet away from the gunman and spoke in a voice only Morello could hear. "You know who I am?" Morello nodded, his hand still inside his jacket but no longer moving toward his weapon. "Good. Now you're going to turn around and walk out of this club. You're going to tell Genovese that Frank Sinatra is under my protection, and if any of your people come after him again, they'll answer to me." Morello's jaw tightened. "Bumpy, this ain't Harlem business. This is family business." "Frank Sinatra made it Harlem business the day he stood up for my people," Bumpy replied quietly. "Now it's my business, and my business doesn't get second opinions." For 30 seconds, the two men stared at each other while Sinatra sang about lost love and broken dreams just 20 feet away. The entire Cotton Club audience was entranced by the performance, unaware that a war was being negotiated in whispers. Finally, Morello's hand moved away from his gun. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is," Bumpy said, "because you're going to collect the other 2 shooters on your way out. You're going to drive back to Little Italy, and you're going to explain to Vito that Frank Sinatra's debt is paid in full." Morello laughed bitterly. "Paid by who? You got 200 grand laying around for a washed-up crooner?" Bumpy reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. 300,000, cash. Consider it an investment in Harlem's cultural future. He handed the envelope to the stunned hitman. "Now get out of my club." Giuseppe Morello took the money, signaled to his partners, and walked toward the exit. Within 5 minutes, all 3 Genovese shooters had disappeared into the Manhattan night. Sinatra finished his set to thunderous applause, unaware that his life had just been purchased by a man he'd never met. But as he took his final bow, his eyes found Bumpy Johnson's table. Their gazes met for just a moment, and somehow Sinatra understood. After the show, Frank found Bumpy in the club's private lounge. The King of Harlem was sitting alone, smoking a cigar, looking like he owned the world. "Mr. Johnson," Sinatra said quietly, approaching the table with the respect of a man who knew he was talking to royalty. "Mr. Sinatra," Bumpy gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Hell of a performance." Frank sat down, his hands shaking slightly. "Jimmy Scott told me what you did. I don't know how. You don't need to say anything," Bumpy interrupted. "But you do need to understand something. That debt is gone, but the protection comes with conditions." Sinatra nodded, waiting. "You keep doing what you've been doing, standing up for black artists, fighting the clubs that won't book us, using your voice for more than just singing." Bumpy leaned forward. "And if you ever get big again, if you ever get back on top, you remember who your friends are." "I will," Frank promised. "I swear to you, I will." Bumpy stood up, extended his hand. "Then we have an understanding." They shook hands, a bond forged between 2 men from completely different worlds who shared the same sense of honor. 3 months later, Frank Sinatra landed the role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity, the performance that would resurrect his career and win him an Oscar. His comeback album, recorded that summer, went platinum. Within a year, he was back on top of the music world. And true to his word, Sinatra never forgot his debt to Bumpy Johnson. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, whenever a black artist needed help breaking barriers in the entertainment industry, Frank Sinatra's name appeared as a supporter. When civil rights organizations needed celebrity endorsement, Sinatra was there. When integration was being fought in nightclubs across America, Frank threatened to boycott any venue that practiced discrimination. The story of that night at the Cotton Club became legend in both Harlem and Hollywood. Frank Sinatra would tell the story privately for the rest of his life, always ending with the same words. "Bumpy Johnson didn't just save my life that night. He showed me what real power looks like. Not the power to hurt people, but the power to protect them." Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, 13 years after saving Sinatra's life. Frank attended the funeral, one of the few white faces in a sea of Harlem mourners. He didn't speak, didn't draw attention to himself, just stood in the back and paid his respects to the man who'd given him a second chance. Years later, when reporters asked Sinatra about his connection to organized crime, he would smile and say, "I knew lots of dangerous men, but the most dangerous man I ever met was also the most honorable, and he taught me that sometimes the only way to stay alive is to remember who your real friends are." The Cotton Club closed in 1984. The building was torn down and replaced with luxury condos. But on March 15th every year, a single white rose appears on the sidewalk where the stage used to be. No one knows who leaves it, but everyone in the neighborhood knows what it represents. The night Bumpy Johnson proved that power isn't about who you can destroy, it's about who you choose to save. March 15th, 1955. Frank Sinatra walked onto a stage expecting to die. Instead, he found salvation in the most unexpected place. From the King of Harlem, who understood that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with guns, but with respect, loyalty, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The voice of America was saved by the conscience of Harlem, and both men became legends because of it.